This is our third part in answering the question about what separates Chassidus Chabad from what some call the mainstream of Chassidus. I just want to observe, when the Rebbe discusses this issue, he doesn't divide Chassidus into two, he divides Chassidus into three. He calls the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid Chassidus HaKlolis, general Chassidus, and then there's Chassidus Chabad and Chassidus Chagas. The point being that it's not like Chassidus Chagas is a continuation of the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid, and that the Alter Rebbe was the one who changed, as people try to contend, but that what the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid did was above the division. It was on such an abstract level that it was above the separation. And then, of course, in the generation of the Alter Rebbe went in the way of Chabad, and the others went in the way of Chagas. Now, when you read the previous Rebbe Siches, you get the clear impression that the Alter Rebbe was given this mandate. He was told by the Magid, in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, that the reason for his neshama emerging onto this earth, and the Alter Rebbe was a very rare neshama, because he was called what is called a neshama chadasha, a new soul, which is an incredibly rare phenomenon. It means a neshama which is not connected to the neshama of other Medishan. It's like the neshama that going to be when Mashiach comes, it's going to be neshama chadash. It's like it says in Likutei Torah. The reason for the emergence of this new neshama was to create Chassidus Chabad, or that's sometimes called Areinbringen Chassidus and Apnimius, Chassidus which can be internalized. Internalized means, as I explained in my first discussion, where since the Rebbe teaches and the person makes himself a chassid on his own, the Chassidus can be your own. It doesn't require constant recharging, constant direct involvement with the Rebbe. So even when the Rebbe is far away, whether it's physical distance or spiritual distance, in the Torah and the Hira of the Rebbe, you have the capacity of being a chassid in all aspects of being a chassid, including the Chassidus neshama aspect, which we call his kashrus, even from a distant place. I'm just going to finish with a third insight, and that is the minhagim. What the previous Rebbe calls Darkei HaChassidus. Darkei HaChassidus has many aspects. It's the minhagim, the specific customs of what we do on Yom Tov and on Shabbos and on weekdays and on Shoshana and Yom Kippur. And it's also the Fabrengen. It's also the customs, for example, of Chazan Chassidus by Shalashudis in Shul, making Melava Malkin, the homes of the Balabatim, the learning of the Likutei Torah and Torah 8 on Friday night, the Fabrengen Yud Kislev, the Hayem that says that Stam Balabatim, Drei Malavach, Tmimim, Ashal Yed and Tog, the frequency with which one learns Chassidus, or an ordinary Chassid learns Chassidus 3 times a week, and a Tomim has to learn an hour each day. These are called Darkei HaChassidus. In other Chassidus, and the culture is much richer, much, much richer. Levush is much more important. The dress is very specific. Each Chassidus has a unique dress, and each aspect has a tradition, and even the most peripheral of these traditions are sacred. They're holy in terms of dress, in terms of what kind of shtreimel they wear, and kind of bekesha they wear, what kind of silk or otherwise begadim that they wear in Shabbos, and so on and so forth. Just to give you an example, it says in the Rebbe's Rishimis that the Rebbe Rashab said, I envy the non-Chabad external form, because he saw the benefits of it when he visited the parts of Europe that had non-Chabad Chassidim, particularly when he was in Vienna. He saw how useful this chitzenius was when he said, then, of course, in addition, there is the culture of shirayim, of storytelling. In Chassidus Chagas, storytelling is mostly telling stories of miracles of the Rebbe, of the Tzaddik, to strengthen Emunas Chassidim. And in Chabad, the stories that are told are mostly Chassidim, stories about Chassidim, not about the Rebbeim, because they're stories about Avodah, how one can grow as a servant of Hashem, rather than stories that speak to the greatnesses of the Rebbeim. And in many ways, the Lubavitcher Chassidim today are more similar in this aspect to the non-Lubavitcher Chassidim in other cultures. In general, in other Chassidic cultures, the frequency with which a Chassid went to the Rebbe was very high, 4 or 5 times a year. In Chabad, the frequency with which a Chassid went to the Rebbe was much less, once a year, once even every 2 years. There's an old Chabad expression, Rebbe Leishon Chiyah Minayin, if you don't visit the Rebbe once a year, Chiyah Minayin, from where do you have life? But in Poland, they went to the Rebbe's very often. First of all, there were a lot of them, and they were much closer. And moreover, the whole Chassidus was about the direct involvement of the Chassidus. But the Tzaddik gave koyach for the Chassidus, and you're charged up sufficiently frequently that the koyach should remain. In Chabad, you went to the Rebbe for direction, and the work you had to do by yourself. I guess one of the things that could most directly summarize the differences is this concept called shirayim. That in non-Chabad Chassidus is a very important part of the Chassidus is eating the Rebbe's leftover food. The word shirayim is an expression which is found in the Gemara, and it's a reference to the leftovers of a korban that the kohanim ate, which were kedusha. They weren't tara, they were kedusha. They were considered sacred, holy. They have a godly light in them. Tzaddikim were the greatest tzaddikim of Chassidus were in such a high madrege that their leftover food was the equivalent of shirei korban. And the shirayim had a zchus in them. Eating the leftover food of a tzaddik, talking about the great tzaddikim of Poland, had a koyach to give even Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem and other midas tevis and so on. When Chassidim used to grab shirayim, in Lubavitch, the Rebbe Rashab would say, "Meine shirayim zane mechayev and nish mezakeh." Taking my leftover food does not give you a zchus; it gives you an obligation. When our Rebbe first became Rebbe, he would protest the fact that people were grabbing shirayim, and he would refer to the fact that this is not a Chabad tradition, and he would mention this lashon from the Rebbe Rashab as well. Meine shirayim zane mechayev and nish mezakeh. And at one point, the Rebbe simply stopped. And some would say he stopped because either he decided maybe it's a good thing or he decided that there's no point in discussing it. People are not going to listen to him. But the summary and the point of this little talk is to emphasize the idea that in non-Chabad Chassidus, there was a lot of form, a lot of culture about the way they dressed, the way they ate, the way they sang, the way they celebrated together, how they went to their tzaddikim, to their rebbes, and how they gave pidyonis, kvitlach as they call it, and how they took shirayim and how they sang songs. All of these things contributed to the development of real Chassidim. That means Chassidim who are neshama connected to Hashem. In Chabad, this form was, for the most part, lacking. There is Chabad Negina, there is Polish Negina, but so much of the external form of other Chassidus is to a great extent lacking within the parameters of Chabad. And I suppose I should mention Negina. In non-Chabad Chassidus, and the music is usually very upbeat, very freilach, a celebration of life, a celebration of soul. And in Chabad, the nigunim could even be bitter. And there certainly could be nigunim gaguyim, the nigunim of longing and dvekas. That means songs that speak to the desire to be attached to Hashem, songs that speak to the struggle of avodas Hashem, to the struggle of a neshama being in this world, and so on and so forth. And of course, this is consistent with the major point, which is that in Chagas, the Rebbe made the Chassidim, and in Chabad, the Rebbe taught the Chassidim how to make themselves.